There are some faces from our childhood that feel less like memories and more like snapshots of a dream. They exist in a perfect, sun-drenched world, untouched by time, forever playing a part in a story we know by heart. For millions of us, one of those faces belongs to a little boy with bright, mischievous eyes and a rather serious expression. A boy who learned to tidy his room with a snap of his fingers and flew a kite on the rooftops of London. He was Michael Banks in Disney's masterpiece, Mary Poppins. And in that role, Matthew Garber became a permanent fixture in the imaginations of generations. He was the quintessential English schoolboy, full of wonder and just a little bit of cheek. But what happens when the cameras stop rolling and the magical nanny flies away on her umbrella? What becomes of the boy when the dream ends and real life begins? This is a story that many people think they know, but they've only read the first glittering chapter. It's a story that veers away from the cheerful streets of Cherry Tree Lane and ends in a quiet hospital room, half a world away from the spotlight he never truly seemed to want. This is the heartbreakingly short and largely untold story of Matthew Garber, the boy who taught us about a spoonful of sugar and the profound bitterness of a life cut short. To understand the boy, you must first understand the world that made him. Matthew Adam Garber was born in Stepney, East London, on March 25th, 1956. This was a London that was shaking off the gray blanket of the post-war years. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke, but also with a palpable sense of optimism. A new generation, the first to be born without the direct shadow of war, was about to come of age, and with them, the vibrant, revolutionary era of the swinging 60s. Matthew was born into a family that lived and breathed the performing arts. Both of his parents, Louis and Lestelle Garber, were actors. They understood the rhythms of the stage, the thrill of an audience, the dedication required to bring a character to life. For young Matthew, growing up in this environment meant that acting wasn't some far-fetched dream of fame. It was the family business. It was normal. He attended St. Paul's Primary School in Winchmore Hill, a peaceful, leafy suburb in North London, a world away from the grit of his Stepney birthplace. And by all accounts, he was a delightful bundle of contradictions. He was described as a spirited and bright boy, full of energy and a love for pranks. He was adventurous, athletic, and had a passion for reading books about mythology and grand adventures. He had an innate ability to make people laugh. Yet, beneath this boisterous exterior lay a deep well of sensitivity. This unique combination of cheeky charm and quiet introspection is what made him so captivating. It was a quality noticed by a close family friend, the acclaimed actor Roy Dotrice. Roy's own daughter, a bright young girl named Karen, was also dipping her toes into the world of acting. Seeing the natural spark in Matthew, Roy made a casual but fateful suggestion to the casting agents at Walt Disney Studios, who were perpetually searching for children who felt real, not like polished little performers. That simple act of friendship would set a quiet schoolboy on a path to cinematic immortality. Matthew's screen debut came in 1963 in a lovely and somewhat underrated Disney film called The 3 Lives of Thomasina. He was cast almost inevitably alongside Karen Dotrice. From the very first frame, their chemistry was electric. They didn't seem to be acting at all. They were simply a brother and sister on screen, their connection so natural and believable that it radiated warmth. The film was a sweet story about a girl and her cat, but for the Disney studio, the real discovery was the children. They had found their Jane and Michael Banks. When production began on what was to be Walt Disney's crowning achievement, the film he had fought for 2 decades to make, there was little doubt who would play the children at the heart of the story. Being on the set of Mary Poppins, must have been like stepping through a portal into a world of pure imagination. The scale of the production was staggering. The sets were vast and intricate. The technical demands were unlike anything that had been attempted before, and the weight of Walt Disney's personal ambition hung over every shot. For a 7-year-old boy, it would have been both exhilarating and utterly bewildering. And it is here, amidst the controlled chaos of a Hollywood blockbuster, that we get the clearest glimpses of Matthew's true character. On the one hand, he was the consummate professional in miniature. He knew his lines, he hit his marks, and he understood the discipline of filmmaking. But he was also always that mischievous boy from London. He found a wonderful ally in the film's luminous star, Julie Andrews. In her autobiography, Julie Andrews writes with palpable affection for her young co-stars, but she reserves a special warm memory for Matthew. She fondly remembers him as a scamp, a little rascal with an infectious sense of humor. He was utterly unfazed by the fame and authority of the adults around him. He had a fearless, democratic charm, treating the legendary Walt Disney with the same cheeky familiarity as he did the crew members. One of the most technically dazzling sequences in the film is a spoonful of sugar, where the nursery magically tidies itself. This involved groundbreaking special effects, with toys marching into their chest and clothes folding themselves neatly. For the child actors, it was a masterclass in reacting to things that simply weren't there. It required immense focus and imagination. Matthew, however, was as fascinated by the process as he was by the make-believe. He would pepper the special effects wizards with questions, desperate to understand the mechanics behind the magic. How did the wires make the beds make themselves? How did the toys move on their own? This wasn't just a child's idle curiosity. It was the mark of a keenly intelligent and inquisitive mind. He wasn't just a puppet in the fantasy. He was an active, curious participant in its creation. The bond between Matthew and Karen Dautrice was the film's secret, authentic heart. They were not just on-screen siblings. They became true brother and sister for the duration of the shoot. Karen has spoken of how Matthew was always the one leading the charge for fun and a bit of harmless trouble. He was her protector, her partner in crime. If she ever felt overwhelmed or nervous, he would instinctively do something funny to break the tension and bring a smile to her face. Their genuine affection for one another is what makes the Banks children so utterly believable and lovable. But there is one little-known story that perfectly encapsulates Matthew's unique and clever spirit. The magnificent step-in-time dance number, set on the foggy rooftops of London, required the actors to be suspended on wires for the flying effects. It was a nerve-wracking experience for the seasoned dancers, let alone for a small child. As it turned out, Matthew had a pronounced fear of heights. Faced with this terrifying prospect, he didn't have a tantrum or refuse to perform. Instead, he came up with a brilliantly clever coping mechanism. He decided that his bravery deserved a little extra compensation. With the straight-faced seriousness only a child can muster, he negotiated a pay rise with the film's producers. For every single take that required him to be hoisted into the air on those wires, he would receive an additional 10 cents. Of course, it was never about the money. The sum was comically small. It was his own personal game, a way of asserting control over a situation that filled him with dread. It was a small private act of defiance that transformed fear into fun. It demonstrated his wit, his courage, and that ever-present mischievous streak. It was, in essence, a very Michael Banks thing to do. Following the colossal worldwide success of Mary Poppins, Matthew and Karen were paired for a third and final time in the 1967 Disney film, The Gnome Mobile. It was another delightful adventure, and their on-screen rapport was as effortless as ever. But a chapter was closing. The children were on the cusp of adolescence. The magical bubble of their shared cinematic childhood was inevitably beginning to dissolve. After the film wrapped, Matthew Garber, at the grand old age of 10, quietly retired from acting. There was no press conference, no farewell tour. He simply hung up his acting shoes and went back to being a regular kid. He had stepped out of the blinding glare of the spotlight as unassumingly as he had first stepped into it. The years that followed were a period of intentional anonymity for Matthew. While his cherubic face was still lighting up cinema screens in re-releases around the globe, he was back in London, grappling with the universal challenges of homework, friendships, and finding his place in the world. He was a student at the prestigious Highgate School in North London, where he was known for his intelligence and his deep love for English literature and poetry. This phase of his life remains the most private, and it seems that was exactly how he wanted it. He never sought to capitalize on his past fame. He gave no interviews about his time as a child star. He showed no interest in making a comeback. This stands in stark contrast to the often turbulent paths of many young actors who can find it impossible to escape the shadow of an early famous role. Matthew, it seems, had no desire to live in that shadow. He had closed the book on that part of his life. His younger brother Fergus, who was born the same year Mary Poppins was released, has provided some of the only precious glimpses into the real Matthew during these formative years. Fergus remembers his older brother not as a celebrity, but as a kind, protective, and intellectually vibrant presence in his life. Matthew was the one who would introduce him to classic literature, who would spark his imagination with poetry, who nurtured his own creative instincts. He was, by all accounts, a loving son and a wonderfully dedicated big brother. But as he grew into a young man, the conventional structured world of an English public school began to feel constraining. The adventurous, prank-loving boy from the Disney set was evolving into a young man with a powerful curiosity about the world that existed beyond the borders of his comfortable London life. The 1970s had arrived, and with them, a new kind of cultural tide. It was the era of counterculture, of spiritual exploration, and of a generation of young people who were looking for answers and experiences far from the mainstream. For thousands of these young seekers, the path to enlightenment, or at least to adventure, led eastward. It was a journey that became known as the Hippie Trail, a loose overland pilgrimage that took intrepid Westerners from Europe through Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan to the spiritual heartlands of India and Nepal. It was a rejection of materialism and a search for something more authentic. In 1976, at the age of 20, Matthew Garber, the boy from Cherry Tree Lane, packed his bag and set off on his own great adventure. He was headed for India. It is difficult to conceive of a place more profoundly different from the meticulously crafted pastel-perfect world of a Disney film set than India in the 1970s. It was a land of staggering beauty and bewildering chaos, of deep, ancient spirituality and raw, inescapable poverty. For a young man like Matthew, who had been raised in the comfortable, ordered world of London and Hollywood, it must have been an overwhelming and intoxicating experience. The precise details of his journey are lost to time. He was not the type to keep a detailed travelogue or send regular updates home. He was there to live, to absorb, to lose himself in a culture so vastly different from his own. For several months, he traveled the country, embracing the unstructured, nomadic existence of a backpacker. But somewhere along that path of discovery, a cruel twist of fate was waiting. In late 1976 or early 1977, Matthew became ill. The most consistent account, later confirmed by his family, is that he contracted hepatitis, most likely from eating contaminated food or drinking unclean water. Hepatitis is a debilitating illness under any circumstances, but for a young traveler in a foreign land with limited access to modern medical facilities, it can be a death sentence. Matthew, likely believing he had nothing more than a severe case of deli belly, a common ailment for Western travelers, didn't seek immediate, proper medical attention. He was young, he was strong, he surely thought he would recover, but he didn't. His condition worsened. By the time the gravity of his illness became terrifyingly clear, it was too late for effective treatment in India. His father, Louis, consumed with worry, flew to India to bring his desperately sick son home. That journey back to London was a harrowing ordeal. Matthew was frail, in constant pain, and a mere shadow of the vibrant young man who had set off on his adventure just months before. Upon his arrival in London, he was rushed to the Royal Free Hospital in Hampstead. The doctors there were finally able to give a clear and devastating diagnosis. The hepatitis, left untreated for a crucial period, had systematically attacked his body. The virus had spread to his pancreas, triggering a catastrophic condition known as hemorrhagic necrotizing pancreatitis. It is a horrifically aggressive illness in which the pancreas, the organ responsible for producing digestive enzymes, essentially begins to digest itself. The internal damage was massive and by that point, completely irreversible. For several agonizing months, Matthew lay in that hospital bed fighting a battle that his body could no longer win. His family maintained a constant, loving vigil by his side. It is impossible to fathom the heartbreak of his parents, who had watched their uniquely gifted son touch the world, only to now watch him slip away from them. It is at this tragic juncture of the story that we must pause to address a quiet, persistent rumor that has for decades cast an unfair shadow over Matthew's memory. In the years following his death, a story began to circulate that his illness was the result of drug use. The narrative was easy for people to grasp. A young man, the 1970s, the Hippie Trail to India. The conclusion seemed to some self-evident. This speculation was and is completely unfounded, and it caused immense and lasting pain to the Garber family. They were grieving the loss of their beloved son, and now his memory was being sullied by a cruel and baseless myth. It wasn't until a rare interview in 2004 with the British newspaper The Mail on Sunday that his brother, Fergus, finally and publicly set the record straight. Fergus spoke with a quiet, dignified anger. He was adamant. His brother, he said, did not use drugs. He was a free spirit, yes, an adventurer, but he was not a drug addict. Fergus clarified that the hepatitis was almost certainly contracted from eating contaminated meat. He said, "The story that he died from a drug-related illness is a complete fabrication. It's something that has been a source of great hurt to our family." This clarification is not a minor detail. It is the central truth of his final days. Matthew was not a casualty of a hedonistic lifestyle. He was the victim of a random, tragic accident, a cruel lottery of fate that can befall any traveler. It is a far less sensational but infinitely more human tragedy. It's a stark reminder that life doesn't always offer up neat narratives or moral lessons. Sometimes heartbreaking things just happen. On the 13th of June, 1977, Matthew Garber passed away at the Royal Free Hospital. He was 21 years old. The bright, adventurous, mischievous, and deeply sensitive soul who had charmed the world was gone. How do we measure the legacy of a life that ended so soon? For Matthew Garber, his legacy is forever preserved in the amber of childhood. He is eternally the 8-year-old boy from Cherry Tree Lane, the perfect cinematic symbol of youthful wonder and innocence. And in that, there is a strange bittersweet perfection. He was spared the often painful transition that plagues so many child actors. He never had to endure the awkwardness of outgrowing his fame or the struggle for adult roles. He left us at the absolute peak of his on-screen magic, and so that is how we will always see him. When Karen Dautrice, his on-screen sister and dear friend, learned of his death, she was devastated. In a heartfelt tribute, she said, "I can't imagine making Mary Poppins without him. He was like a brother to me." Her words are a testament to a bond that was forged in a magical make-believe world, but was as real and true as any family tie. In 2004, 27 years after his death, Matthew Garber was posthumously honored as a Disney legend. His brother Fergus accepted the award on his behalf. It was a long overdue official recognition of his indelible contribution to the Disney legacy. But more than that, it was a moment of public remembrance, a chance to finally celebrate the boy, not just the character he played. Matthew Garber's story is not a cautionary tale. It is a human story, a story of a brilliant, joyful light that burned for far too short a time. It is a story that teaches us to look beyond the image on the screen and remember the complex, beautiful, and vulnerable person who lives and breathes behind it. His life may have been a brief chapter, but the story he helped to tell is eternal. He is and will forever be our Michael Banks, a little boy on a grand adventure who for one shining, glorious moment taught the entire world to look up at the sky, to cherish family, and to believe that anything is possible. And that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.